Some things you just know before they're said. The way someone tenses when a name is mentioned, the half-second pause before a response, the silence that hangs too long after a picture is passed around the dinner table. When I first brought Elijah home, I knew my family didn't have to say it not outright. They didn't use slurs, they didn't raise their voices. They just looked a little too long, a little too quiet. I'd told them ahead of time. Send photos, mentioned his name, his job, his kindness. They smiled in all the right places, nodded, said we're looking forward to meeting him with voices that felt too smooth. But when Elijah walked through our front door, tall and brown-skinned, dressed with care, carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of wildflowers for my mother, there was a shift in the room, like someone had turned the temperature down 3 degrees. My father shook his hand with forced formality. My mother accepted the flowers, thanked him, but placed them on the counter like they didn't belong in the center of the table. My brother barely looked up from his phone. And during dinner, the conversation danced around Elijah like he wasn't there. My uncle asked where he went to school, and when Elijah said Howard, he nodded like he'd been expecting it, and then changed the subject to college football. My aunt asked if his family was from around here, and when he said his parents were from Atlanta, she just smiled tight and said, "Oh, Southern folks," like that explained something. Later that night, when we were alone in the guest room, I asked him how he felt. He smiled softly. "I've been in colder rooms," he said, then added, "But I was hoping this one would be different. For you." I didn't cry until he fell asleep. Growing up, my family never called themselves racist. They prided themselves on being respectful, educated, good people. But what they really meant was, we're polite about the lines we refuse to cross. They never imagined someone like me, a pale blonde daughter from a long line of small-town white families, would fall in love with a man like Elijah, someone with warmth in his voice, calluses on his hands, and a skin tone they only ever saw on TV or at the gas station across town. They could accept black musicians, black athletes, even black politicians at a distance, but not at their table, not in their bloodline. When we got engaged, my mother didn't cry. She didn't even ask to see the ring. She just said, "I hope you're thinking this through," my father said. "You'll make things harder for your children," I said. "They'll grow up in a home with love," he said. "They'll grow up confused." I stopped trying to argue, because by then, I understood something no degree or upbringing could unteach them. Their issue wasn't Elijah. It was what Elijah represented, a choice outside the boundaries they'd drawn in invisible ink. We married in a park near the coast, not a big wedding, just friends, sunlight, and our vows under a canopy of eucalyptus trees. My family didn't come. They sent a card, signed with all their names, no personal notes. It said, "We hope this brings you the happiness you're looking for," as if I was searching for something they couldn't define. But here's the truth, I wasn't searching. I had already found it. In the way Elijah looked at me like I was more than my past, in the way he treated strangers with gentleness, even when they didn't deserve it. In this way, he knew how to hold silence without letting it grow sharp. They didn't see that, but I did, and I chose him anyway. Our first year of marriage was quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence had become part of our rhythm. A soft, mutual understanding that we were still healing from different kinds of wounds. Elijah never once asked me to choose between him and my family. He knew I already had. But every now and then, I'd catch a flicker of sadness behind his eyes when he saw me reading an old text message from my mother that never got a reply, or when he watched me linger too long at birthday cards in the grocery store, only to walk away empty-handed. He filled the space they left with something softer. He made dinner when I stayed too long in my thoughts, left notes in my books, played old jazz records on Sunday mornings, like we were building something sacred from scratch. There were moments I thought maybe this was enough. Maybe you didn't need a whole family to feel whole. Maybe love could grow like wildflowers unexpected, definitely alive. But grief is tricky. It waits at the edges, and mine had started to wear different faces. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Elijah found me sitting on the floor, holding one of his t-shirts in my lap, crying without a sound. He didn't say anything. He just sat next to me, resting his hand lightly over mine, and I whispered, "They never even asked if I was happy." He didn't respond with anger, didn't say you deserve better, though he could have. He just said, "I know, and sometimes being seen is the only answer you need." Then, one night, the phone rang. It was my brother. I stared at the screen as if it might bite. Elijah walked in, saw my face, and simply nodded permission to do what I needed to. I answered. His voice was stiff. "There's been an accident," he said. "My father, a fall, a fractured hip, complications, hospital. No one is sure what will happen yet." He paused before continuing. "Mom, she's not coping well." I thought, well, you should know. I said thank you, then hung up, then I cried. Not for my father, not entirely, but because, after all the silence, they still reached for me in crisis. I didn't ask Elijah if we should go. He was already pulling on his shoes. The hospital was 2 hours away. The sky outside the car window darkened slowly, like it wasn't sure what kind of night it wanted to be. Neither of us spoke much, but his hand stayed on my knee the whole drive. When we arrived, my mother was in the waiting room, hunched in a chair too stiff for her grief. She looked up and saw me, and for a moment, I thought she might stand, say something, anything, but she just stared. Then her eyes slid to Elijah. She froze, and in that instant, the years between us folded in on themselves. I watched her expression flicker recognition, discomfort, and something else, exhaustion. Too tired to pretend anymore, too scared to be proud. Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He walked forward, gently took the empty seat beside her, and said, "Can I get you anything water? A blanket, a moment of steadiness?" She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away. And I realized, with quiet awe, that even now, especially now, he offered what they never had, compassion without condition. Over the next few days, we stayed. Elijah coordinated with the nurses, spoke to the surgeon, made calls when my mother's hands trembled too much to dial. My brother came and went, overwhelmed and unsure, but Elijah remained, always the first to arrive, always the last to leave. He stayed late into the nights, wheeling my father down the hallway for short walks, reading instructions aloud, asking questions no one else thought to ask. One morning, I woke up in the hospital's family room to find him asleep in the chair beside my father's bed, his hand resting lightly on the old man's blanket. My father's eyes were closed, but his body was turned ever so slightly toward Elijah. That was the moment I knew they might never admit it out loud, might never say we were wrong. But something had changed. They had mocked me for choosing him, and now he was the only one holding them together. My father recovered slowly. Each day brought some small step forward, sitting upright, swallowing without help, walking with support, and each day, Elijah was there. He kept track of medications. He remembered names nurses, aides, specialists. He cracked soft jokes when no one else knew how to speak. And my family, who once barely looked at him, began to turn toward him without even realizing it. It started with my brother. One afternoon, He pulled Elijah aside near the vending machine. I saw them from down the hall, my brother speaking. His body language stiffer than usual. Elijah nodding, listening carefully, hands calm. Later, Elijah told me what he'd said. Didn't expect you to stick around like this. I wouldn't have. Not an apology, but a crack in the wall. I nodded and said, "He never expected you to carry us," Elijah said. "That's the difference. I don't carry people because they deserve it. I carry them when they need it." My mother was slower to soften. She watched him, always at a distance, like she couldn't decide if he was a stranger or a miracle. But one morning, while Elijah was helping my father ease into a chair, she spoke, not to him, but about him. She turned to me, voice low and almost brittle. "He's patient." I looked at her, unsure if it was a question or a confession. She added, "He's not what I thought." Neither of us said anything after that, but the words hung in the room like the beginning of something real. After my father was discharged, we helped set up a rehab routine at home. Elijah rearranged their furniture, installed temporary rails in the bathroom, talked to the physical therapist, asked the questions no one else thought to ask. He even took time off work to stay another week. I offered to manage it myself. He shook his head. "This isn't about just helping him. It's about helping you not be alone with all of it." That was the kind of man I'd married, and they were finally seeing him, not through their old lens filtered with doubt and ignorance, but as he was, as he had always been. One night, as we were leaving their house, my father called out. We stopped at the door. He sat in his chair, still frail, but alert. His voice was rough, like someone unused to saying what mattered. "Thank you," just that, to Elijah. And Elijah, in his usual way, nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. I cried in the car on the way home, but not from pain, from relief, because the man I loved had carried the weight of their silence, their doubt, their distance, and still chose to show up. He never demanded that they change. He just gave them every reason to. And somewhere along the way, they did, a little, quietly, but undeniably. A few days later, I found my mother at the kitchen table, flipping through a photo album. She pointed to a picture of Elijah holding my father's arm, steadying him down the porch steps. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. Then, she turned the page. The invitation came in the mail, in my mother's handwriting. It was for a family dinner, the first in year, not a holiday, not a funeral, just a small gathering, as she called it, inside the card. She wrote, "We'd like to have you both here. It would mean a lot. You both." 2 words I didn't realize I had needed to read until they were right there in ink. Elijah read it, placed it back on the table, and looked at me. "Do you want to go?" he asked. His voice was calm, the same way it had been since the very beginning when people questioned us, when they turned away, when they watched him with narrowed eyes. But now, there was something new underneath, something like hope. And I nodded, not because I forgot everything, but because we had come too far not to walk through the next door. The house looked the same, white siding, blue shutters, porch lights on. But inside, something had shifted. There were new photos on the walls, one of my father in recovery, smiling weakly, one of my mother and me from a recent visit. And in the hallway, I noticed a photo I'd never seen before: Elijah, standing beside my father, helping him with his walker. It wasn't posed, wasn't meant for a public show. It was real. When we stepped into the dining room, chairs were already arranged, and at the center of the table, right next to mine, was a seat clearly meant for him. No one hesitated this time. My brother stood and gave Elijah a brief pat on the shoulder. My aunt offered him a drink. Even my father, slower now, managed a quiet, "Glad you made it." No one said the word sorry, but no one needed to, because sometimes healing doesn't sound like confession. It sounds like inclusion. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the same meal my mother had made for years. But this time, the table felt different. People asked Elijah questions and actually listened. He talked about his work in housing development, and for the first time, my uncle, who had once muttered things about them taking over our neighborhoods, asked for a genuine follow-up. Elijah answered without condescension, without bitterness, just clarity, just grace. He passed the salt, laughed at the right moments, knew when to speak and when to sit back, and slowly, the awkwardness melted, like it had never needed to exist at all. After dessert, my cousin leaned across the table and asked Elijah about the jazz records he liked. "I heard you're the one who got her into Coltrane," he said, gesturing to me. Elijah smiled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." The room chuckled. And I watch them. My family see him. Not as a black man their daughter married, not as a guest they barely tolerated, but as Elijah, the one who had held us all together when they couldn't. Later, as people began clearing dishes, my mother and I stood side by side at the sink. She handed me a plate. I rinsed it. No words passed between us for a while. Then, quietly, she said, "He's good for you." I turned to her. She wasn't looking at me, just drying a spoon, slowly, deliberately. Then she added, "He's good for all of us." I didn't cry, but something inside me softened, like a knot I didn't know I still carried had finally begun to untangle. When we left that night, my father walked us to the door. His gait was slow but steady. He extended his hand to Elijah. They shook, firm and silent. Then my father said, almost too quietly to hear, "You were exactly what we needed." Elijah didn't answer right away. He just nodded once, then placed a hand gently on my back as we stepped into the cool night air. Somewhere along the way, the tension faded. It didn't vanish all at once, like a scene in a movie. It wore away slowly, like water over stone. There was no dramatic apology, no family meeting where everyone confessed their mistakes. But there were dinners, phone calls, birthdays remembered. Elijah became part of the background not as a symbol, but as a person. Not a conversation to be avoided, not a subject to tiptoe around, just Elijah. My mother now calls him when she needs help with the thermostat. My father asks him for advice about the new ramp he's building in the backyard. My niece draws pictures of our house with him in it always next to me, holding a cup of tea or helping someone. When my cousin's son broke his arm and panicked in the ER, it was Elijah who sat beside him, calming him down, cracking jokes until the boy forgot he was afraid. He has become the kind of man who shows up before you realize you need him, and the kind of man who stays even when you once told him he didn't belong. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't brought him home that first night, if I had let their discomfort steer me away. If I'd chosen to fold myself back into their shape, instead of growing beyond it. But then I look at my family now, still imperfect, still learning, and I know he didn't just change them. We changed them, together. Not with rage, not with lectures, but with consistency and love that didn't demand approval to be real. A few weeks ago, we hosted a summer barbecue in our backyard. Everyone came. My mother brought pie. My father brought folding chairs and insisted on setting them up himself. My brother brought his 2 kids and said, "Don't let them near the sprinkler, they'll soak the whole neighborhood." Elijah manned the grill, played old-school soul music on the speaker, laughed with my uncle, tossed a football with my nephew, chatted about property taxes like he'd grown up on this very street. I stood on the porch, watching him move between conversations, and I thought, This is what being at home looks like. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned lavender, my father pulled me aside. He held a glass of lemonade, sweating in his hand. "I was wrong," he said. "I didn't answer. I didn't need to." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself from what I didn't understand." He shook his head slowly. "You saw something I couldn't, and I'm glad you didn't let us ruin it." I don't carry resentment anymore. There was a time when I thought I'd need their apology like oxygen. But in the end, healing came not from what they gave me, but from what he never stopped giving. Patience, kindness, presence. Elijah never kept score, never asked them to say thank you. He just showed up again and again, and now he's not just part of the family. He is the family, the one who anchors, the one who steadies, the one they trust to hold it all together when things fall apart. They once mocked me for marrying him. Now they call him first when they need help. They call him son. They call him Uncle Eli. They call him ours. And the most beautiful part, he never needed them to. But he let them come to it on their own. If love is a revolution, then ours was the quiet kind. No war, no shouting, just soft rebellion, and the grace to stay.